So it's something we struggle with. I got one more quote before we move on from this. This is out of the same book, and this is one of my favorite quotes. It's actually one of the most quoted of his quotes. He says, DNA neither cares nor knows, just is, and we dance to its music. I always, Richard Dawkins says, you're dancing in your DNA. John Lennox used this against him in one of the debates. So, what do you think about this? Well,
was actually changing his mind.
Is it? Wait! Don't jump ahead. So Dawkins claims there's no evil and there's no good, but that there's pitiless indifference, and we dance in our DNA. Right? That's kind of what he was saying. But if we go back to his first quote, I just highlighted a couple of them. It doesn't look like indifference to me.
Yeah.
I mean, he's judging God, but he says there's no good and bad. It looks like he's judging a good and bad quite dramatically. I mean, God is jealous. Well, that sounds like he's making a ethical claim on God. He's petty, he's unjust, misogynistic. I have to admit, I didn't know. No, I hear that word all the time, and I did not know what it was, and I was like, I got to actually look it up so I can say something. You guys know what it is? I didn't know what it was.
Exactly. I think I know, but women.
Hatred of women. I was like, okay, I don't.
Is he married?
Exactly. It's
this guy. This is all opinionated. His opinion.
Yeah,
That's all it is. There's nothing based on facts. It's all opinionated. It's.
Well, if you guys are here when we did the moral argument, William Lane Craig kind of addressed this. He said, Richard is actually a moral realist because he has all these complaints about God, and in fact, he is very aware of what's right and wrong in the world. He just doesn't have a basis for it.
Well, he talks about basis. It's like the legacy of a Christian world.
Well, his basis is God. He actually. What I said, and maybe I should stick to what I wrote because it's better than what I'm saying, is this idea that what is his basis for making these claims? Well, whether Richard Dawkins knows it or not, he believes in God. Yes. Because he can only have these perspectives if there's a God. Because if there's no basis for right and wrong, then there's no right and wrong. It's exactly what he said in the second book. It's just no good, no purpose, no bad. There can't be any of those things because it's just us dancing in our DNA. Richard Dawkins actually believes in God, even though he claims to be an atheist, because he hates him. Although it's changing, like Judy was saying. He seems to be drifting in a positive direction.
He goes back and studies new biology. He's going to find out none of
That's
that.
actually that's not the one he's for sure knows that it's not God for the biology. Now the moral evil that's happening in the world with wokeness and all that stuff is like.
He went from saying that Christianity was a plague on humanity to saying that it should be taught.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big shift, okay?
It was pretty new. It was last year.
They posted on the internet. I mean, he's not hiding his opinion.
Yeah, it was last year that it would be better. It's like, I think most Islamic teaching would be detrimental. It's like the Christian world we were teaching is the way to go because it's better for the world.
But he's seen the fact that there has to be a standard. Because you can't determine right and wrong and good and bad if there's not something to base that on. And even Richard Dawkins is now saying, Christianity might be a good basis.
He could be the modern day Paul.
He could be. I pray for Richard Dawkins on a regular basis when I read his stuff because it's like, he's... And John Lennox, one of my favorite guys, and he teach at the same university. And since they debated, they actually become friends. And they do talk on a regular basis. Every once in a while, John Lennox will mention Richard or a conversation he's had over tea or whatever. They're both Brits. So I'm hopeful. That would be amazing if he would. Because he is an incredibly articulate speaker. He just is confused. But that doesn't really solve our problem of evil, but I think Richard made my case for me that evil actually proves that God exists. It doesn't prove he doesn't exist. Now, that doesn't get us all the way there, obviously, because now we have evil and we have this perfect, loving God, and we have to reconcile that. So, if we're to reconcile that, there has to be a purpose for evil.
Actually, the reason we know that those things evil and not non-evil is actually is already put to bed in my own mind. Right.
Well, and I think that one thing we need to think about is the word evil. And we're going to get to defining it, because if there's not a basis, then it's just opinion. So there's got to be the basis. Like I said, even Richard Dawkins agrees there has to be a basis. So when we start talking about a purpose for evil, our conversation is going to get a little harder to have because of our personal experiences. So again, I'm not a pastor. I'm not a counselor. Can you imagine a purpose for evil?
Not a primary purpose, because if God is like a primary cause, I think God as a primary cause can do no evil, because it's the opposite of his nature. So there's not a primary cause to evil. I think because of man's self-determination in the fall, evil then does exist. And then, so God isn't the cause of it, but now it exists. God can use things for good.
To drive people to good.
Yeah, it comes down to actually the wrong question, right? The question is, why is there evil? Not really is there what the purpose for evil is. And I think that's where we kind of have to twist. When we're dealing with people that are trying to prove that God doesn't exist, they tend to want to lean things in their favor. There's a reason evil exists, right? So that if we can answer the why question, then we can start walking this down a path that people might be able to get. So first thing we have to do is actually get a definition for evil, because I hear evil tossed around about so many things. So what is evil? I'll just give you a working definition. Evil is the absence of goodness. It's an imperfection in this world. If God is the source of goodness, then evil has to be where God's goodness isn't, right? And I'll give you a couple examples to kind of put this in your brain. But think about it. If you removed all the goodness from the world, would there be evil? If everything was evil, there is nothing to compare it to. So there wouldn't be a contrast. We require a contrast. And Frank Turek, one of my favorite Christian apologists, uses this example. He says, if I was to remove all the rust from this car, what would I have?
A new car.
Well, a nicer car at least. What happens if I removed all the car from the rust?
Still in the rust.
I got nothing. Rust is a imperfection on the car. Now you might have a pile of rust, but you wouldn't have a car anymore if you removed all the good car from the rust. Another good example is shadow. You know, shadow requires a light. If you take the light away, what do you have? Well, you don't have a shadow anymore. Another one, sunshine. I love sunshiny days. Sunshine. What happens if the sun goes away? Got nothing. You kind of get my point. I got a couple others just for kicks and giggles. Cold. You're talking about cold the other day, right? You know, cold's not a thing, right? It's just the absence of heat. In fact, you can't measure coldness. And I know what cold is. I've been on the north slope of Alaska in February, minus 40 degrees with wind chill, whiteout conditions. I've been in Finland in the wintertime. That's cold. Okay, so I know what cold is, but scientifically, cold's really not a thing. It's just the absence of heat. So the lack of something isn't something. It's just how we're describing it. And that's, I think, how we need to think of evil. It's the absence of what we wish was there, which is goodness. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I can do without cold. We can go to the next slide. Yeah.
Well, the next slide I'm going to hesitate to go to because this is one of those that it won't be very pleasant. But so what is evil? Well, evil is terrorism, war, famine, disease. These are bad things. But are they evil?
What evil
Well,
acts?
definitely absence of goodness. I mean,
There is an absence of goodness there. In at least most of these.
to do evil.
There's intentions to do evil.
There's intentions to do good in war, but the act of war on each side becomes evil.
Yes, I think that's fair. Not always is the intent evil, but the actions can be construed as
Right.
Evil,
Do
right?
something good.
Yep.
So, I think what we have to do if we want to attack the evil question is break evil into categories so we can kind of get our minds around it. And effectively, there's two types of evil that most people use. One is moral evil. This is humans doing something bad against another human. That's moral evil. Then there's natural evil. These are things like disease, hurricane, wildfire, earthquakes, those type of things. And people call those evil. So with your permission, I'm going to break into these two categories so we can kind of start dissecting this topic a little more. And mankind's wickedness creates a lot of evil. We know that. We've all experienced that. That's where you get war and murder and terrorism and rape and human trafficking. You also get things like envy. You get, jealousy. I mean, those are bad things too. Yep. So where are you going to draw the line? So, okay. The real question is it evil or is it bad? And it's really about perspective. We often toss everything into the evil bucket that's bad, but is it really bad or is it from your perspective? And this is one that's, well, it's tough to get your head around because you usually think of things from your own personal situation and how you view things. And there's no question there's a lot of suffering in our world. And when we see things as really, really bad. The question is, does it translate into what we should be calling evil, or is it bad? There's a difference.
So if you go theologically, I don't know the answer to this, right? But when Jesus is defining sin, and what word is he using? Because I think of the continuum of most of us would say that if I just walked into this room and shot someone, most of us I hope would put that in the evil category. But then Jesus says, if I even say a bad word against someone, that he puts that up at that same level. So if Jesus is conflating those two things, the question is evil or bad? Is that a false distinction that we...
Well, he's talking about sin, and you're equivalating sin with evil.
I would definitely make that. I would personally make that.
Yeah, it make the danger in doing that is it's a broad brush. And a broad brush is very hard to define and characterize in a way that you can logically and reasonably address people's concerns. And what I am suggesting is we should maybe dissect it a little deeper and look at how God defines things for sure. And we need to be aware of God's perspective on things before we just toss everything into the evil bucket. And you're not wrong. I'm presenting an alternative to just the one bucket fits everything approach. Because you can get to the point where, the dog puking on the floor becomes evil, and depending on the circumstance, we need to be very clear on how we're defining it. Because the people are trying to put as many things in that bucket as they possibly can. Because the more evil there is, you saw the argument, well, that's proof that there's no God, right? Because there's so much evil in the world. And
Okay, just to take a stab at that then, if the law and the prophets all come down to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and love your neighbors yourself, then I would, you can take me where we go, but I would say that any volitional action that goes against those two laws, I would put that in the evil bucket, not the bad bucket, basically. But I don't know.
Yeah, well, let's move on and let's see how that plays out. Because I understand exactly what you're saying, but I want to look at natural evil first, because this is one that we actually only had a couple on the natural side. That's actually the reason I put it on two sides, right? Effectively, all of these are moral, and these are natural. I can't spell. It's a good thing I'm not a professor anymore. Let's deal with natural sin, because believe it or not, this is one people struggle with a lot.
Natural evil.
Natural evil. Sorry, I said natural sin. Sorry, Chris has got me using his vernacular. That's okay. So natural sin. These are things like earthquakes, typhoons, floods, lightning, extreme cold and hot, drought. You can probably come up with a lot of others. And disease, for sure. And there is no question that these are bad. And I'm going to focus on natural disasters more than disease to make my point. The aftermath of things like natural disasters or disease seems really bad to everybody. Now, whether you're in it or whether you're not in it. When you see it on TV, you think it's bad. There is suffering, there's death, there's devastation. The question is, why do we think that is evil? It's bad. No question it's bad.
I mean, it goes against the flourishing of life, basically. I mean, maybe that's the reaction.
And I think that's a really strong argument, the flourishing of life. Again, you have to decide who gets to define what that looks like. You know, our planet has mechanisms, according to Richard Dawkins, and it behaves a certain way. And natural disasters are actually part of that mechanism. I actually, you see so often, let's say a hurricane comes through and devastates a huge area, and you'll see quotes of, people, why would God allow this to happen? And I personally think blaming God's kind of absurd if you're not believing in God to start with, right? And these are people that often are screaming. And the naturalist is very quick to blame God for something that happened in nature, yet they say they don't believe God. And I always struggle with, why are they doing that? So, it's really naturalism, right? That's what natural things are. And I would probably cross out the ism and just go to natural. I think the mechanisms of our planet is how God has designed it. And to raise natural disaster to the level of evil, I think, is kind of absurd. Now, bad. I don't like it when our house got hit by a tornado. It wasn't good for me. It was scary, but it wasn't evil, and I can't blame God for that because tornadoes happen in this area.
So that's a very good point about what you're talking about, because think about the flood, right? Was that evil, or was it good because God made it happen?
Yeah.
Well,
it's perspective, right? And actually perspective in the end is going to define what evil is. And I think that's kind of where we're going to get. I mean,
but the argument, I will say, even we follow our human perspective, there's a fact that we do not know the long-term.
Well,
think about it, even we believe our humanity is a benchmark. When there's no blood, the people will eat each other. You look at the age, they will fight each other, they will eat each other. They will decrease with no return. Until the blood have a little bit return in the long term. So the other thing, I'll give you one evidence, the naturalism, you are right. So in China, in Asian China, we have an old saying called, a heavy snow is prophecy for harvest. So basically what that means is with the winter, in Chinese is 瑞雪兆丰年, 5 words. What that means, at least in central China, If the winter is very, very cold, a lot of snow, that's good things. Because if there's no snow, then the wheat has no water, then will be dry, and then there will be no harvest. So, but nowadays you will see, okay, it's too cold. But at that time, people follow the agriculture calendar. They know what they should prepare. So, it's just a different way to look at how do you use the natural.
Yeah, and in natural things, I mean, the example I came up with, which is a little absurd, but I'll share it anyways. If I walk up to a lion and I yank its tail, and it turns around and kills me or hurts me, is it God's fault?
No, it's yours for pulling its tail.
Well, it's not even the lion's fault. It's just natural. Well, it's the stupidity factors in. Another one would be, okay, weather. We're always obsessed with weather. Why don't we blame the weatherman for a bad weather report?
My husband does all the time.
Well, we blame them for being wrong, but
But I guess the core of their argument would be that yes, we know that these natural things are all happening. But if you look at, say, the tsunami that happened a decade ago that wiped out hundreds of thousands of people, I think the atheist argument would be, hey, you're telling me that there is a personal, all-powerful God, and He's in charge of everything. And I know that naturally stuff happens. There can be volcanoes here, volcanoes there, floods there, floods that. But really, He couldn't stop, 200,000, 300,000 people from getting wiped out on one place. I mean, that's where they're coming from.
it's definitely, and it comes back to death. And we're going to come back to death here later, because I think most of the things that we look at when it comes down to natural evil is because of our perception of death. And we consider death to be evil in a lot of cases, and it's not, by the way. It's just the way the world works. I mean, those 200,000 people could have had their heart stopped by a heart attack, and you wouldn't blame God for that, right? Or they could have died from cancer or from being hit by a truck, and all those people could still be dead today. So what's the difference between the tsunami and another natural death?
And if that's fair. I think our problems with death, not on terms that we define,
Yes.
not everyone living
Yep, and we think, it's a travesty they didn't have 10 more years. I don't get to define that. And from my perspective, yes. But it's his perspective that matters. And that's where we have to grapple when we're faced with death. And I'll get back to that. But for the most part, I think natural evils are bad when it happens to you. But to call it evil, I think, is going a little too far. I think natural
I never think
things.
natural stuff is evil. It's not good, but it just never occurs to me.
You hear
to call
this
it evil.
from the atheists a lot. They go after disease often as one of the hammers. Why do these kids with cancer, which you go to a place and you see kids having cancer treatment, it brings you to your knees. And I don't have an answer, but I know God does. And the point is, we know with overwhelming evidence that God exists. The fact that we call things evil, that means God exists. So we have two choices. We have the choice, it's my own phone, gosh, sorry. How bad is that when the teacher doesn't mute his own phone? What we're faced with is two options. It's trust God and search for purpose, or be angry at God and face the consequences of being angry at the creator of the universe. It doesn't sound like a really good option. You only have those two in the reality.